A world divided, the Cold War's genesis. The world in 1950 was a tense and uncertain place, a time when the echoes of World War II still reverberated through the streets and homes of many nations. World War II had just ended, leaving behind a landscape scarred by conflict and ideological division. Cities lay in ruins, economies were shattered, and the human cost was immeasurable. From the ashes of this global conflict rose two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. These nations, though allies during the war, now stood on opposite ends of a new ideological battlefield. These two nations, once allies against Nazi Germany, now found themselves locked in a struggle for global dominance. The wartime camaraderie had dissolved, replaced by suspicion and rivalry. This struggle, known as the Cold War, was less about direct military confrontation and more about ideological competition, political maneuvering, and economic influence. It was a war of ideas fought in the hearts and minds of people around the world. The United States, a capitalist democracy, championed individual liberty and free markets. The American dream was built on the promise of freedom and prosperity through hard work and innovation. The Soviet Union, a communist state, advocated for a centrally planned economy and the abolition of private property. It promised equality and the end of exploitation, a vision of a classless society. These fundamentally different ideologies created a deep chasm between the two superpowers. This ideological divide was not just a political or economic disagreement, it was a clash of worldviews, each side believing in the superiority of its system. This chasm extended beyond their borders, shaping the global landscape and influencing the allegiances of nations worldwide. Countries were often forced to choose sides, aligning themselves with either the capitalist West or the communist East. This ideological struggle played out on a global stage, with each superpower seeking to expand its sphere of influence. Diplomacy, espionage, and proxy wars became the tools of this new kind of warfare. The United States, fearing the spread of communism, adopted a policy of containment, aiming to prevent the further expansion of Soviet influence. This policy was articulated by President Harry Truman and became a cornerstone of American foreign policy. This policy would have profound implications for the Korean Peninsula, a region geographically positioned at the heart of this global power struggle. The division of Korea into North and South became a flashpoint in the Cold War. The Cold War was not merely a distant geopolitical chess match. It was a pervasive presence in the daily lives of people, influencing everything from politics to culture. It was a conflict that touched the lives of millions around the world. People lived under the constant threat of nuclear war, and the fear of espionage and subversion was ever present. It fueled proxy wars, toppled governments, and shaped the destinies of entire nations. The Cold War's reach extended to every corner of the globe, from the jungles of Vietnam to the streets of Latin America. The Korean War, a conflict that erupted in the summer of 1950, would become a tragic example of the Cold War's devastating consequences. It was a brutal and bloody conflict, leaving millions dead or displaced, and its legacy continues to shape the Korean Peninsula to this day. Korea, the stage is set for conflict. This small peninsula, often overlooked in the grand scheme of global politics, was about to become the epicenter of a major geopolitical struggle. Korea, a peninsula jutting out from the Asian mainland, became a focal point of Cold War tensions. Its strategic location made it a valuable prize for both the United States and the Soviet Union, each eager to expand their influence in Asia. After centuries under Chinese influence, Korea fell under Japanese rule in the early 20th century. The Japanese occupation was harsh and exploitative, leaving deep scars on the Korean people and their national psyche. Japan's defeat in World War II created a power vacuum on the Korean Peninsula. The sudden absence of Japanese authority left Korea in a state of uncertainty and turmoil, with various factions vying for control. The victorious Allied powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, agreed to a temporary division of Korea along the 38th parallel. This line was meant to be a simple administrative boundary, but it quickly took on a much more significant role. This division, intended as a temporary measure to facilitate the surrender of Japanese forces, quickly solidified into a hardened political reality. The 38th parallel became a symbol of the ideological divide between communism and capitalism. The Soviet Union backed a communist government in the north led by the charismatic but authoritarian Kim Il-sung. Kim's regime was marked by strict control and a cult of personality, with Soviet support bolstering his power. The United States supported a pro-Western government in the south, led by the staunchly anti-communist Sangman Rhee. Rhee's leadership was equally authoritarian, with a focus on building a strong, independent South Korea aligned with Western interests. The two Koreas, divided by ideology and separated by an increasingly fortified border, were a microcosm of the global Cold War. Propaganda from both sides painted the other as the enemy, further entrenching the division. Both sides harbored aspirations of unifying the peninsula under their respective ideologies. The North sought to spread communism, while the South aimed to establish a democratic, capitalist state. Border clashes and skirmishes became increasingly common, raising tensions on the peninsula and fueling fears of a wider conflict. These incidents were often small in scale, but significant in their impact, each one bringing the two Koreas closer to war. The situation in Korea was further complicated by the complex internal dynamics within both North and South Korea. Political factions, economic struggles, and social unrest added layers of tension to an already volatile situation. Both Kim Il-sung and Syngman Rhee governed with an iron fist, suppressing political dissent and consolidating their power. Their authoritarian rule left little room for opposition, creating an environment where conflict seemed inevitable. This internal repression, coupled with the external pressures of the Cold War, created a volatile mix that would ultimately erupt into open warfare. The Korean people, caught between these powerful forces, faced an uncertain and dangerous future. The Korean War, when it finally broke out, was not simply a conflict between two Koreas. It was a brutal and devastating war that would leave a lasting impact on the peninsula and the world. It was a proxy war. A conflict in which the United States and the Soviet Union, while not directly engaging in combat, would provide military and logistical support to their respective allies. This support included weapons, training, and strategic advice, turning the Korean peninsula into a battleground for their broader ideological struggle, fueling the flames of war and transforming a regional conflict into a global crisis. The Korean War would become one of the first major confrontations of the Cold War, setting the stage for future conflicts and shaping the geopolitical landscape for decades to come. The North Korean offensive, a nation divided by war. The Korean peninsula, once a unified land, found itself torn apart by ideological differences and external influences. On June 25, 1950, the fragile peace on the Korean peninsula shattered. The echoes of war reverberated through the mountains and valleys, signaling the start of a conflict that would reshape the region. Armed with Soviet-supplied tanks and artillery, North Korean forces surged across the 38th parallel in a surprise attack. This bold move was meticulously planned and executed with precision, catching many by surprise. This invasion, a well-coordinated and highly effective military operation, caught the South Korean army off guard. The South, unprepared for such an onslaught, found its defenses quickly overwhelmed. The North Korean People's Army, better equipped and trained than their southern counterparts, made rapid advances, capturing the South Korean capital of Seoul within days. The fall of Seoul was a significant blow to the South, both strategically and psychologically. The invasion sent shockwaves through the international community. Leaders around the world watched in alarm as the conflict escalated, fearing the broader implications for global stability. The United States, caught off guard by the aggression of the North Korean regime, condemned the invasion as an unprovoked act of aggression. The American government quickly mobilized its resources, preparing for a potential military response. President Harry Truman, facing one of the first major crises of his presidency, was determined to respond forcefully to what he perceived as a direct challenge to the post-war international order. His administration worked tirelessly to craft a strategy that would counter the North Korean threat. The United Nations Security Council convened for an emergency session, condemned the North Korean invasion, and demanded an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal of North Korean forces. The international body sought to restore peace and stability to the region. The Soviet Union, notably absent from the Security Council meeting, was unable to veto the resolution due to its ongoing boycott of the UN over the issue of Chinese representation. This absence allowed the resolution to pass unchallenged. This absence would have significant ramifications for the course of the conflict. Without Soviet opposition, the UN was able to take decisive action, setting the stage for international intervention. The North Korean invasion of South Korea was not merely a military action. It was a calculated move in the broader context of the Cold War, a period marked by intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was a watershed moment in the Cold War, a stark demonstration of the escalating tensions between the two superpowers and their respective allies. The conflict in Korea became a proxy battleground for these larger geopolitical struggles. The United States, deeply invested in containing the spread of communism, viewed the invasion as a direct threat to its strategic interests in the region. American policymakers believed that allowing North Korea to succeed would embolden communist movements worldwide. The decision to intervene in Korea would have far-reaching consequences not only for the Korean peninsula, but for the course of the Cold War itself. The conflict would draw in numerous nations, leading to a protracted and bloody war that would leave an indelible mark on history.